We are back. You are chatting with John P. Today we are going to be talking about 5 watch brands that watch collectors really love to hate. Now, I know a bit of a negative topic, but I think you'll find it interesting because we work with a lot of different collectors here at Del Rey Watch, and there are some recurring brands that always come up in conversation, not only here at Del Rey, but also in my previous watch collecting history, and I think some of these brands actually have some redeeming qualities, and there are some following, if not cult followings, behind some of these brands, so I want to share some of those perspectives and ideas with you as well, because hey, who knows, maybe you're one of the haters and you can be converted to a lover, or vice versa. So it's always interesting to have these kinds of polarizing conversations, and I love seeing it in the comments below. Today on the wrist, I have a Rolex 1601 in gold. I have it on a actually an AP alligator strap, as well as a aftermarket diamond bezel. A little bit silly of a watch. I know some of you purists out there, hey, even myself included, will kind of look at it and get a little bit of a chuckle, but I think it's just an interesting look, and I like switching things up sometimes. So yeah, that's what I have on the wrist today. Also, do not forget to find me on Instagram at @TheRealJohnP, where you can see some interesting pieces that we get at Del Rey, and also just little bits of information about daily life as a watch dealer. So let's jump right into it. The first brand that watch collectors love to hate is UBoat. Now, I think that this brand always comes up in conversations when watch collectors and hardcore watch collectors like to look at retail prices and kind of chuckle at them and say, oh, that's such an expensive watch for what you get. Well, it's true, right? You know, sometimes UBoat has really expensive watches for what they have in terms of the movements and horology, but when you look at the brand, it's really a brand that draws celebrities and athletes to it for other reasons, and mainly the design. They have unique design, and they basically created the large, chunky sports watch with a rubber strap. Now, of course, they did not really invent this, although the particular type of rubber that they use, that many other brands currently use, apparently they are often given credit for inventing that specific type of rubber, but nonetheless, they really popularized that kind of chunky, rubber-clad or rubber-including watch. Now, what I think UBoat also does pretty well with is their use of alternative materials. They do very well with using things like titanium, sapphire. They also have various others, metals and materials that they spend a lot of time, energy, and money on developing, and that's not something that a lot of brands can say. A lot of brands are okay with taking off-the-shelf stainless steel and incorporating it into their watches. So UBoat does something a little bit different, and oftentimes hardcore watch collectors do look down on them because of some of their movement choices. Next, we have a watch brand that is getting so much buzz recently, and I'll say that personally, I don't think it's entirely justifiable, but this is Jacob & Co. Now, if you're not familiar with Jacob & Co., it's a newer watch brand compared to some of the watch brands that are out there, the Holy Trinity, Rolex, so on and so forth. This is a much newer brand. It came out in 1986 by a guy in New York City in the Diamond District who was originally a jeweler. Now, this particular individual, Jacob, actually, just as his brand is called Jacob & Co., he was really known for selling diamonds and jewelry to the rap community when many others were just not willing to. There's different types of clientele in jewelry and in watches, and the type of way that you carry on business is just a little bit different. And this guy, who ultimately ended up creating Jacob & Co., was known for that. He catered to the rap community. He's even featured in some video games and some songs and some music, so he became pretty popular in kind of the rap community. And so eventually he came out with this brand, Jacob & Co., And where they really kind of aim is by having these very expensive, very elaborate, complicated watches out there that there might be one of, or there may have been one, or maybe it was made and then disassembled for parts and they made another, and price tags up into the several hundred thousands, up into the millions of dollars. Very complicated pieces that feature oil drills that are moving, pieces that literally also double as a music box and play opera songs, and some very intricate pieces where spiders will move their legs, and they really get a lot of buzz in magazines, Robb Report, Wall Street Journal, all of those types of media outlets because they're just so expensive, so elaborate. But where they really get the consumer is by offering these more approachable yet very overpriced quartz-driven watches that are known for having 4 or 5 time zones. And that's really the watch you see floating around when people think of Jacob & Co. out in the industry. And, personally, I can't say that I totally take issue with that, but I think it's often misleading, especially in certain communities where people don't necessarily know about all the intricacies of watches, and they see a watch that's $1 million and they're going to somehow in their head equate this to be a $5,000 watch that's really has a production value of $500 or $600. So that's oftentimes why hardcore watch collectors look down on the brand. That being said, they do have these super high-end pieces, but I personally would kind of liken this brand to be the modern day Frank Mille, which, if you're not familiar, they were kind of known for piecing together a lot of parts and not having a solid reference number scheme where you could really look at it and determine what the watch was, because this was another brand that was kind of putting together parts and didn't have a solid catalog. Although they did have models, but the catalog just wasn't as solidified as something like Rolex or Patek Philippe or Vacheron would have. So that's what I'll say about Jacob & Co. Leave in the comments what you think about this brand. I know you're seeing this brand from everyone on the internet, and I want to hear your opinion on this brand. Next, we have a brand that I even owned one of these watches before, 8 or 9 years ago, and this is UBoat. Now, this is a brand that takes its name after a German submarine, and you can see it in the watches. They're chunky, they're heavy, they're all pretty much over 44 millimeters, so they're big watches. I think Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was wearing one of these, 8 or 9 years ago. Sylvester Stallone, some of the other, larger, more muscular celebrities were kind of touting these things around. And, they have interesting, cool, rugged-looking military designs. But I'll say that in terms of watchmaking, they just don't have a lot going on for them. They don't use interesting movements. They don't have in-house movements. Now they have some watches that incorporate oil, but, the classic UBoat, including the U42, which is the one that I had, is really just about that kind of interesting design that has a crown that swings out and pulls out, kind of in the same vein of what Panerai does, and that's where UBoat got a lot of their popularity, by having a cheaper, more approachable alternative to Panerai when the Panerai craze was going on. Now, I had the U42. I had bought it on the forums 8 or 9 years ago. I thought it was just so cool because of that interesting crown. I never really wore it a lot, but I wore this to kind of like a meetup. There was some site where you could, meet different groups, and there was a watch collecting meetup in the city that I was in, and I wore this thing out, and it just was so ill received. I felt pretty bad about it, and I know that sounds ridiculous, but at the time, there was so much negative energy coming from watch collectors, and I think it's fair to mention this, that as watch collectors, we can often look down on some of these things because we don't like it, but sometimes people really do enjoy these things. So UBoat is a brand that to this day gets a lot of hate from watch collectors and certainly diehard hardcore watch collectors. Now, this next brand is Porsche Design, or Porsche Design, how you'd like to pronounce it. And I recently saw a comment in one of my videos where I talked about this brand and how I think that there's a lot of value in this brand, in their watches, because they're selling at such steep discounts from retail. Their retail prices are often even more approachable than something like an IWC, and they're using the same movements that brands like Tag Heuer, IWC, and all the others are using in their entry to mid-tier to upper mid-tier pieces. Solita movements, which many, if not most, manufacturers in that same tier are using. And Porsche Design does a very great job with using titanium, which few brands do at an approachable under 2,000 pre-owned or gray market price point. No one is using titanium like that. Maybe Zin, which I'm also a big fan of, but Zin gets a lot of love from the watch community. So Porsche Design, I received this comment, and someone said something about, why would I buy a watch from a company that also sells toaster ovens? I don't even know if that's particularly true, but it's true that Porsche Design makes everything from sweaters to t-shirts to shoes to towers. And I can't say that Porsche Design themselves have factories where they're producing these things, but certainly they're putting their names on these items and they're selling them. Now, considering what they do with the watches, these watches are certainly being produced by the same assembly houses and manufacturers and designers that are out there producing watches from other brands, including micro brands. So for the micro brand community that loves to hate on brands like this and say, oh, I could have so much more value in a micro brand, these things are being oftentimes produced, manufactured, and designed by the same pools of people in Switzerland. So when we consider something like Porsche Design is doing with their watches, they even have an in-house caliber chronograph that is a flyback chronograph. So for a brand to actually invest in having their own movement, a flyback chronograph, who's doing that? Very few people are doing that, especially at the same tier as them. Also, Porsche Design watches have been produced by brands like Orfina, IWC, and some of the others throughout history. So for us as watch collectors to kind of look down on it and say, oh, they make toaster ovens, they make shoes, why would I ever, have a Porsche Design watch? I think that's a little bit short-sighted considering there's a lot of great value here, and Porsche Design has really tried to develop something that they think watch collectors would enjoy, like this in-house flyback chronograph. Leave in the comments below what you think about Porsche Design. I would love to hear it. And last one, this is a brand that I think gets a lot of hate. I've done videos in the past where I may have said some negative things about them, and it's very polarizing. Richard Mille. Now, oftentimes I hear comments, I receive feedback from collectors even, and they will say the retail prices on these Richard Milles are just so high, it's just not worth it. The movements are used in other watches, this and that, and it's always the same movement argument over and over. And once again, much like, Hublot, sure, Richard Milles attract celebrities, tycoons, things like that, people that are drawn to that very expensive, flashy lifestyle. But Richard Mille does put a lot of time and energy into developing certain materials that they work with. Consider it, Hublot on steroids. Richard Mille, some of their watches, they need to break 20 of them for the 21st to actually take in terms of the proprietary materials that they use for the case construction. So sometimes they have to get it just right to make that case, and if it messes up, there'll be a crack or a chip, and they have to start from scratch. And so, sure, the retail prices are high, but they're creating some things sometimes that often have the price of broken watches factored into them. So it's something to consider. Sure, they have watches, much like any other brand out in the industry, that really doesn't take that much money and effort to produce, but that's just something the business does to keep floating and also keep reinvesting into their brand. So do I think Richard Mille is sometimes overpriced? Of course, it's a very high-end, top-tier luxury item, and that's what comes with that. But do they do some unique things that I think is very often overlooked by watch collectors because of, sometimes the lack of having very advanced movements? Sure, I think that's probably the case here. What do you think about Richard Mille? Comments below. Love to hear this one as well. I'm really looking forward to the polarizing conversations that we're going to have about some of these brands and the love-hate relationships. And if any of you own these, would especially love to hear that as well. So, guys, this has been 5 watch brands that I feel are hated on a whole lot by watch collectors. Do not forget to thumbs up, like, and subscribe. I really do appreciate it. DelReyWatch.com. We have posting a very rare, very limited edition Laurent Ferrier watch that is absolutely astonishing, a very special tourbillon. I want you to check that out. And of course, you can find me on Instagram, The Real John P. You have been chatting with John P. Ciao.